everyone. I'm Linda Nickell, and welcome to the Happiness Hour. Every week, photographers meet here to connect, inspire, and create with the help of a guest speaker who shares the stories behind their photographs and offers tips to inspire us to try something new. You can find the schedule for the Happiness Hour on my website at lindanickell.com/happiness hour. And while you're there, please consider signing up for our monthly newsletter. Tonight's guest is Gerri Whitley. Gerri is a landscape and cityscape photographer who brings a thoughtful eye and deep technical knowledge to every frame she captures. Based in Chicago, Gerri is not only known for her stunning urban and natural imagery, but also for her passion for helping others grow in their own photographic journey. Gerri is also a dedicated instructor and workshop leader at Chicago photography classes, where she's developed and taught courses like Love Your Tripod, Shoot for the Moon and Stars, and Planning 101, How to Use Photo Pills. You can connect with Gerri through her website at gerriwhiteleyphotography.com. And if you're on Instagram, you can find her at Gerri Whitley. In tonight's presentation, Cityscapes, Capturing the Beauty of Cities, Gerri will take us on a visual tour of her photographic playground in Chicago, sharing breathtaking images and insightful tips on how to elevate your own cityscape photography. From expansive skylines to hidden gems and architectural marvels, she'll guide us in finding beauty and meaning in urban scenes, showing how to work with light, find strong compositions, and express the spirit of a city through your lens. Welcome to the Happiness Hour, Gerri.
Thank you, Linda. I'm excited to be here.
Well, thank you for accepting my invitation to come and speak to the room. And I think I mentioned it earlier, I was trying to it's been a few months since I invited you, so I always kind of forget. I should just start taking notes of how did I find this person? I believe one of your photos made it through an algorithm that made it into my feed, and it was a shot because I was in the same area. It was like I don't know where I was, but it's basically it looks like a reflection of the building, right? And
Mhm.
I remember having to get that shot by hanging over the end of you know what I'm talking about? And it's
Yeah, the parking garage. Yeah.
yeah. And so and your shot was just so much better than mine. So it made me kind of like, all right, let's dig along. And I went to your feed and just kind of made my way into kind of your portfolio and then jump to your website because that's kind of what I do. And when I noticed that you did a little teaching, I thought, well, here's an opportunity to reject you. So thank you for not rejecting me. So what did I miss in your introduction? If there's something you want to add, this is a great opportunity to fill in the gaps of something I might have missed.
I think you did a wonderful job. I do love teaching. It's a lot of fun for me. I always try to think about it, and hopefully I'll pull that off tonight too. Thinking about photography in terms of the creative part, right? Our vision and composition, and what do you see and what do you feel? And then the nuts and bolts part, right? How do you get that, right? And the nuts and bolts are really just in pursuit of the vision. But without the nuts and bolts, sometimes we can't quite capture what we have in our head and translate it into the photo. So,
All right. Well, we're gonna cross our fingers and hopefully you'll like flip some switches and get us excited about trying something completely different. If there are people in this room that are mostly, I would say a lot of us are nature photographers, and this is a great opportunity for you to spark some inspiration into making somebody take a completely different um, look at their photography and try something different and pull out that tripod. So, all right. It's I kind of, I'll laugh because when I saw that you taught love your tripod, I thought, God, I wish I'd seen that before I asked her so I could say, teach this one because I don't love my tripod and I know I need to, but I don't. All right, go ahead.
Okay, well, maybe we'll convert you by the end of the night. Like Linda said, I live in Chicago, and I'm probably, if I had to think about myself, I'd probably say I'm more of a landscape photographer, but I live in one of the biggest and really beautiful cities in the U.S. And so I do a lot of cityscape photography. And so, um, oops, come on, there we go. And she gave you this information, but here's how you spell it. Um, One of my big passions right now is night sky photography. And if you're not kind of laughing in your head, you probably should be because I live in one of the brightest places on earth. Um, so you'll probably see some of that reflected in some of my work because I love trying to catch the moon in places and when I can connect some of that astrophotography that I love so much in Chicago. I don't get a lot of opportunities, but every once in a while. So we'll take a look at that. I am on Instagram and Blue Sky, same handle. So just my name. So how do we tell? You know, you think about cityscapes. We're really telling the story of the city. And I think it seems to me like most of you don't live in cities from our quick conversation or not big cities. Um, but as you maybe travel or even in your own cities or work travels, that sort of thing, you know, if you get a chance to get out and photograph, or maybe you're taking a trip specifically to go photograph, there's something that draws you there. You know, what's the iconic thing you want to capture? What do you want to convey in your story of the city? Um, you know, you think about Chicago, for example. I put this picture of from our St. Patrick's Day celebration, which is completely unique to Chicago. Nobody else dyes a river green and runs around like it's Mardi Gras on St. Patrick's Day. So the Saturday before St. Patrick's Day is just chaos in Chicago, and it's absolutely amazing for all three types of, I think about cityscape in terms of cityscapes, more like think about landscape, but with city scenes, right? Same kind of rules apply. So if you're a landscape photographer, cityscapes aren't that different from landscapes. It's a similar compositional rules and think about the sorts of ways you want to capture the city that's just the subject matter's different. Architecture can be so fun. And you know, sometimes I have a hard time drawing the line between these three, but architecture, and you think about abstract architecture shots and some things like that, we have a ton of interesting and kind of the range of architecture. You know, Chicago is the birthplace of the skyscraper. And so we've got some very old, beautiful old buildings and some very beautiful brand new buildings. So we kind of run across all different styles of architecture, which is fun. And then street photography, of course, people inhabit the city and capturing those special moments is so nice. If you're a wildlife photographer, you have the skills to be a street photography is wildlife photography, right? Just different subject. So if you think about it like that, it's very similar, right? Exactly the same sorts of techniques that you would use, you can use for people. Um, so, so the problem with things that are iconic, right? You want to come to Chicago, you want to capture maybe the skyline. It's been done a lot, right? Lots and lots of people have captured that skyline, and we all want to capture something that's unique and special. That is my shot, not you know you put it with 10 other people's shots and you wouldn't be able to tell which one was mine. Maybe I wouldn't be able to tell which one was mine. So I want to talk to you a little bit about how do we think about getting something that's like a little bit more unique, a little bit more personal, something mine, not something that, and of course, get the generic shot. It's fun, right? They're beautiful. But then how do you get that next shot, the one that's yours that really has meaning for you? And so I think about things like special events. And by that, I mean, maybe, Chicago Henge, when the sun lines up with the east-west streets of Chicago, for example. Um, St. Patrick's Day is another example. Maybe the marathon, if you're a runner and you could capture runners against the city streets, those sorts of things, seasons and weather. Um, so let's jump in. I'm just going to talk a little bit. Let's talk about that skyline and being able to capture something that's iconic, but still has your own spin, your own flavor. So this is my shot from the observation deck at the Sears Tower. Now, if Linda went there at night, she probably has the same shot. They might be so similar as if we put them side by side, we might not be able to tell whose is whose. If she used about the same focal length that I did. This shot, a million people have this shot, right? It's a nice shot. It's beautiful, right? We've got a lot of depth in the city. Everything seems to kind of be sprouting up, and you get this great three-dimensionality because you're looking down on the city a little bit. And then we have the lake behind the Hancock and the Trump Tower back there. So you get this black background, which is kind of nice. It makes it kind of stand out and stop, right? Beautiful, but not unique. So how do we get something that's a little bit more interesting, a little bit more unique? So this shot is taken from the Hancock. The Sears Tower is kind of over here, just out of frame. And on this particular day, this was a year ago, in December, I think, a year ago last winter anyway. And this is a very cold day. We had one of those big polar vortexes come down, and it's negative temperatures here. And so the city smokes, right? When all those steam vents and things just smoke when it's very, very cold. And I intentionally went up into the Hancock to capture the city in the evening because I wanted to catch sunset and I wanted to catch the lake because it was steaming like crazy, right? It was still quite warm. And so you had this huge steam rising up off the lake. And I got lucky because we also got, as the sun set, we got a little temperature drop and we got a little bit of fog with the heat from the city. And so I got this dimensionality, and the steam and the color is really different than what you get ordinarily. So weather can really drive the answer to how do I get something special, right? You don't always get a choice about what the weather is when you travel, right? You pick some dates and you go, and you can pick a time of year that it would be possible to get a shot like this, but this doesn't happen all the time. So, what else could you do? You can think about, how do you capture something that's a little bit different, that looks at things from a little bit different perspective. And here I captured the shadows of the buildings over the lake and the beach. This is Oak Street Beach. And then what we call in Chicago, you like this is the concrete beach. So, you can get something that's a little bit different that implies the buildings, but doesn't capture them, right? You can zoom in and capture some things, and we can get things that are more unique for ourselves. Another look at the skyline. I took this from a helicopter, not my drone. I don't fly that high. I always feel like I have to get that out there to start. It's completely illegal to be this high with a drone. And a friend of mine won a helicopter trip, and I got lucky enough to get invited along. And this shot was the shot I wanted. And I actually talked to the pilot before we did it and said, hey, I really want this shot. There were 3 shots I wanted. And I told him, I want this shot, I want this shot, I want this shot. He's like, okay, tell me when we're getting there, and I'll slow down for you. And so it's possible if you do decide to pop for a helicopter trip or something like that, it's possible to really be directive about it and say, hey, here's what I want to get. Here's how I'd like to go. And maybe if you felt like you didn't get this, you could do a circle and try it again. Oh, and just to back up a moment, when you photograph from somewhere like those observation decks, like the Sears Tower or the Hancock, those are the 2 high observation decks in Chicago. A couple of challenges, right? There's reflections from the glass because we're shooting through glass. And I meant to grab mine, but so we want to use lens hoods. Have you guys seen these? They're like a black hood and it has suction cups on it and then it fits around your lens. So it creates a shadow so no light reflections go on the glass in front of your lens. So you can shoot. So you can shoot without getting the reflection of the lights or the people walking by or maybe even yourself. And the other thing we want to do, because the windows aren't very clean usually, you would look for a clean spot, but um, inevitably there'll be some dirt, spider webs, things like that. Want to shoot with a very open aperture, which seems kind of crazy, right? So I'm going to back up here. This is shot at probably like f2.8 because everything's so far away. You get good depth of field even though you have an open aperture, and then the dirt is not in focus on the window, and you don't have that to deal with in your images. So that's anytime you're shooting through glass, if you don't have something very close, you want to have a pretty open aperture. Um, you know, if you do something like a helicopter tour, remember you can drive the agenda with that. They have a route they're going to fly, but you can say, hey, I really want to get this shot. Can you do another circle around this, or you know, that sort of thing. You know, they have so much time, so you have to select the places you want to take a little extra time, so you don't get shortchanged with other spots. But you definitely can make sure you got the shot. Shutter speed's everything with this one. You want to have a pretty fast shutter speed because you're moving faster than you realize. Fog. Anytime there's fog, I am out if I can be out. Fog is, I think, probably my favorite condition. On the ground, in the air, day, night, it's magical. It transforms everything. And I just, when there's fog, it's amazing. One thing we get that's really nice is we get this low fog that comes in off the lake. And so I'm always looking for when will there be fog and trying to predict when there'll be fog so that I can, you know, not miss it. There was a little bit of fog today and I was tied up and I could not go out. It was killing me. It wasn't a ton of fog, but just a little bit. So for Chicago, and you can usually kind of figure this out wherever you are. Usually for Chicago, it's when the wind's coming off the lake. So cold lake, cold, wet air hitting warm city makes fog. So when the wind is anything with an east in it, so north, just a little bit east of north to southeast will make fog in Chicago. And so if you're on the East Coast, it probably looks a lot like that. You know, if you're on the West Coast, it's the opposite. But looking for and understanding that is really important so that you can pick your day and get there for the fog. Up here on these observation decks are a wonderful place to catch fog if there's fog. And there are city cams on the Sears Tower so you can see what the conditions are. So you can see if it's white. You probably don't want to pay to go up there. Or if you've got this beautiful rolling sea of fog with the buildings sticking up out of it. Winter is my favorite season. I know, like, I know that you guys are too nice to say this, but I know there's at least 3 or 4 people who are going, wow, she's crazy, right? Winter's my favorite season, and the colder the better, because the conditions get really beautiful, right? We get this ice, this amazing ice, and it changes every single day. And snow transforms the landscape, and it just becomes very interesting. So it makes it worthwhile to be out in the cold. And so you can imagine, like, every day that there's snow and ice, there's something new to photograph, because I've seen this whole basin around North Avenue. I've seen it clear out from solid ice to no ice at all in about an hour. The wind shifts, a wave comes, and boom, it goes out. And I've seen it fill in the same kind of time frame. So it's very varied and very interesting. I also love, it's a theme, right? I love lousy weather. So Chicago, being in the Midwest, we get a lot of storms. And the great thing about Chicago is we have some pretty predictable places where lightning will strike. Sears Tower is the most struck building for sure in North America. I think maybe the world. I can't promise that's right, but if it's not, it's close, because we're in the Midwest and it's really tall, right? And so, you can kind of include that, and your chances of getting a strike if the storm goes over the city are pretty good. And so, if you are going to do any work with storms, a couple of things. One, have a plan to get out of there if lightning gets close. You don't want to get struck by lightning. It takes all the fun out of it. And two, but seriously, I make a little smart aleck comment, but be safe, right? So number one is be safe. Number two, keep yourself dry, because you're going to get wet doing this if you're outside. And so have somewhere to retreat to, look for cover. And three would be to think about protecting your camera for the same reason. Most of our cameras are pretty good with weather, right? I've gotten mine wetter than I'm comfortable with. And, it's still going well. The big thing is you want to make sure the hot shoe is covered. That's the most vulnerable point on your camera to moisture. And like when I'm doing this, if I'm running a time lapse on storms, then I will put the plastic cover over my camera to protect it. If I'm shooting in the rain, I won't, because I just you can't find the buttons. You can't see what you're doing. It's like shooting in mittens. It's terrible. But you can get some really beautiful photos in bad weather. The other thing we get on Lake Michigan is some really big waves. And so looking for those big wave days. And I'm going to talk to you about motion here in a moment, and thinking about how you capture images to thinking about shutter speed, like how much motion do you want to show? And I love these days. It's got to be windy for this to happen, and it's got to be out of the Northeast to have them be really big. And we can get, you could see how big these waves are. We get several of these really, really big wave days, and then we get a bunch of really quite big wave days. And so those are wonderful to get out and just see the power of the lake, right? And so, kind of being a little bit of a landscape photographer, you can see I kind of gravitate to the lakefront and kind of where nature hits the city. I love the lakefront especially.
Jerry, before you go on to another photo, I've got a question specifically about this one. Can you share some of your settings for this particular wave shot?
This is, I think it's 1/6 of a second is my shutter speed. So my goal is to not smooth the waves too much. So I want some of that spiky movement in the waves, but I also want this flow, the waterfall kind of effect of the waves washing back down off of where we would normally walk, right, along the lakefront. And so kind of trying to match those two things.
Thank you.
It always turns green when this condition is like this, which is just such a great color that the lake can show us. And sometimes we get really, really, really lucky. Before last year, I would have told you that this is not possible. Like, Chicago's too bright. You're not going to see aurora over Chicago, no matter what, period. We're too far south and it's way too bright. And this happened twice last year. So I missed the first one. It was cloudy until about, I don't know, 3 a.m. And I had a thing that I could not change the next morning. And then I was planning to make a long drive and then be up all the next night, hoping that it would happen again, right? And so I completely missed the first event in Chicago. And I had been up in the Porcupine Mountains, which is on the south shore of Lake Superior in Michigan, not a full week before this, and had caught just an amazing aurora show up there. really big solar storm, overhead aurora, just really fantastic over the lake. And so I already had some really nice aurora really recently over a lake in a much, much darker place than anything I was going to get to around Chicago. And I wanted it over the skyline. I'm like, I'm gonna point my camera at that skyline and I'm gonna hope that it gets strong enough. And so I'm sitting there, I can see a little tiny green glow like way out over the lake. And I'm texting with my friends who'd gone somewhere darker, and they're like, oh, it's great. You can't believe what we're seeing. And I'm like, oh, I think I made a bad choice. And then this happened. And you can really tell how bright it is because look how few stars we can see, right? It's just, this is insane. Anyway, just so special to have aurora over the city of Chicago. I'm still in awe of that. What a moment, right? I'm sure a bunch of you saw the aurora, and it is absolutely worth chasing. It's incredible. So back to winter. I use my drone a lot in the winter because I can get better perspectives on the texture of the ice over the water than I can get to from shore. There's a few places where I can get some really nice perspectives on the city and the lake from shore, but a lot of times you want to be out over the water to get, this texture and movement be up with the city. And this is why I love winter, because it's just always so different, right? These shapes and textures are really amazing and fun to capture. Here's another one, kind of my night sky, my astro background. So this is 2 years ago, December, and I could not travel for the Geminids that year. Last year there was a full moon or nearly full moon, so it wasn't great because it was too bright. But that year I could not get out of town for the Geminids. I had something the day before or after. I just couldn't go. And so a friend of mine had captured the Perseids in the summer, looking out over the lake, and he had gotten way more than I would have expected, right? And so I'm like, okay, well, I might as well give it a try. This is December in Chicago, so it's very cold, but that also means that it's dry, so there's less, the moisture really reflects the light, and so it really creates a lot more light pollution when there's any humidity at all. And this is all night long, and I was surprised at how many stars and how much of a star trail I could get over the city of Chicago. So it's a good thing to kind of think about, and you can see that they're a lot fainter over here than they are over here where it's dark. And so you want to be thoughtful. I've also tried this from west of the city, looking at the city, and I got 3 little stripes because it's just too bright. I'm shooting right over the loom of the city, and it helps that I'm kind of on the edge of the loom of the city. But if you have some place that's relatively dark, you can get images like this with the city, which is special, right? It's different. You don't see a lot of this. Plus, it's all night in the winter, so there's that. But well worth the night out, right? I captured some meteors. I had another camera pointed at Adler Planetarium, which is away from the city, kind of out on a piece of land. I captured some meteors there, and there are I think 4 meteors in here, but you can't find them; they're too faint. So one of the other things we can think about is how can we do other things when we get somewhere like this particular morning. I went out, this was cold, so you can kind of see that the city's steaming here. But, as is often the case when it's very cold, it's also usually quite clear, right? Because there are no clouds to hold the warmth in. And so it was completely clear. There was a pretty gradient, and there was some really nice light on the city, but the sky was really boring, right? There was nothing going on up there. And so I was like, oh, how do I make this more interesting? And so I did a double exposure. So we could do some of those kinds of things like double exposures and ICMs and get creative and create something on a day where maybe the conditions aren't as good as we would hope for. A few clouds would make this a lot more interesting in a single exposure, but I didn't have that condition. So I'm out, it's cold. What am I going to do? I want to do something a little bit different. And it's something that's unique. There are not a lot of other people that have a shot that looks like this, right? This is pretty unique to me. Back to even more, you can tell I'm obsessed with the moon and the night. So I planned this. I do quite a bit of planning of my photography because if we want to catch the moon somewhere, we want to, a plan is so important. So I use photo pills, which is an amazing tool. And if you don't have or use photo pills, photographers ephemeris is helpful as well. I like photo pills a little bit better because it has the Milky Way and some of that kind of information in it that photographers ephemeris at least didn't used to have to have. And so this is the most recent total lunar eclipse that we had. I don't know, was this winter, like, I don't know, November, December, January, somewhere in there. Pretty recent, no, March. It was in March. And so it's pretty recently. It was a cool night. It wasn't super cold, which was kind of nice, out on the beach. And, a really long night. It's nice to know that you have the right lens on and the moon's going to show up where you want it to if you're going to spend all night standing around on the beach in the dark. So this one I wanted to expose for the eclipsed moon. And my hope was that I would have these little moons that kind of look like this, but there was quite a bit of moisture and clouds. And so I got a bunch of fuzzy moons where if it's not real cloudy and moisture in the sky, then they look more like this, just with an overexposed part of the white part as the eclipse happens. And so I guess I'll be trying this again because I don't love the fuzzy moons. But we can get something really unique by doing some planning and figuring out where things are going to be. And something special like a lunar eclipse is a great time to do that. We have another one coming in the fall, a year in the fall. And so, something to think about even now, where would I want to be for that? What would I want to put in front of that moon? And that's true of nature or city. It's the same thing, and there's just different subjects you're putting with your moon. So another icon, the L, right? This is the shot I think Linda was talking about a couple minutes ago, the reflection shot. That's both of these are taken from a parking garage. They're great. I love these shots. I love the L, but they're fairly common shots. Like a lot of people have these shots. So how do we do something that's a little bit more unique, a little bit more mine and different from other people's? We can do the henge, right? So setting up the timing for when the sun lines up on the east-west streets. In Chicago, we're east-west. Our grid aligns with the east-west and north-south. And so this happens for us on the equinox. And this is also kind of a classic henge shot. So a lot of people have shots that are very similar to this, not identical because the street is always different and the people on the street are different, but fairly similar. So I'm always looking at the henge. I take the henge as a challenge to get something different than other people get. And so I'm always looking for a new location and something that's kind of unique. And so a year ago, I got this in the springtime. This is sunrise, and this is not far from where I live. So you can see it's out of the downtown the Loop area with really hot, tall buildings. And this is kind of a unique shot because there's normally a train station right there where the train is. And that was under construction. And so they had taken down the structures of the train station. So the train is, just on the tracks without kind of the shelters and the station and the signage and all that. And the construction gave me all this dust, which was amazing because it made the sun rays really, really radiate out. And this guy showed up at the absolute perfect moment. So I was really pleased with this. And what's interesting about this is you can't get this now because there's a new station being built right there. The tracks are concrete. And so this literally doesn't exist anymore. So, trying to find something unique and different and really thinking about, okay, I know what this looks like. I want to do something similar, but somewhere else, and trying to visualize that and think about how can I have something that's unique to me, that's special. Um, I love moon alignments, and this one happens somewhat infrequently, and it seems like it's always cloudy. Uh, And so I was really thrilled to get a pretty clear night for this. And I think 2 trains came through. It seems like when you want a train to come, no trains ever come. But this one came at just the right time, and then one other came when the moon wasn't quite centered. So I was lucky to get that. And here's an interesting tip. So to get a shot like this, you really need a tripod, but tripods aren't allowed on the CTA. I've taken this from a train platform. And so I brought both my platypod, which you guys probably know what it is. It's a little flat plate with a tripod head on it, and also a bean bag. And I know all of you wildlife people probably use or are familiar with bean bags. So that I can stabilize the camera and get clean shots. So sometimes those are good tools in places where you can't use a tripod. And then this is that kind of the famous S curve. And this is, for obvious reasons, photographed a lot. I think Linda caught this. I think I've seen that on her website. And it's really a great spot. So I'm always trying to find some way to get it differently, right? I've done long shutter speed to get the snake of a train, and I've done short shutter speed where you freeze the train, and I've gotten it with a Christmas train, and on and on. But this one in the snow was kind of special. I like that. Need a fairly fast shutter speed to stop the train. So I always say, if you want to stop the L, you want about 100th of a second. That's my rule of thumb that I tell myself. And so when you're photographing it at night, you need 100th of a second. You need a fairly high ISO to be able to pull that off. And then the last time I was there, I did a zoom burst on the train for the same reason. I just wanted to get something different. It's not perfect, but just kind of another way of thinking about, how do I get something different every time I go? How can I be creative and do something different? I just don't want to keep repeating the same shot over and over. I want to push myself to find new and more interesting ways to photograph things. And then, of course, back to double exposures. This is the last time it snowed in Chicago this year. I went out and took some photos, and it snowed really hard for, I don't know, 45 minutes or something. And it was great. I know, again, there's a few people going, okay, she really is crazy. And then the snow kind of dropped off, and it wasn't so interesting photographically. So this is me on the way home, and I'm trying to figure out, how can I do something interesting? And so I did a double exposure, just playing around with it to see what I could make. And I really kind of I got a lot of interesting repeating shapes in this double exposure, and was able to kind of line the sky up in the window. Only got a couple of shots at it before the train came and I had to get on it. And of course, the L is a great place for street photography. So that's another way you get really unique and interesting shots in the city. This one, the light shining through the glass, and this kind of mysterious shadow of this woman drew me into this scene. I hate that he's on his phone. We're all on our phones all the time, staring at our phones. I struggle to find people for street photography that kind of aren't on their phones. But this is a target rich environment, if you want to think about it like that. When you're on the train and maybe moving from place to place, shots you're taking, don't forget about, hey, this is a great spot to do some street photography. So this is my favorite Ansel Adams quote. I'm not going to read it to you. I'm going to tell you kind of how I interpret it. So Ansel says, nature, and that's true of cities as well, is chaotic, and there's not a lot of organization, and there's a lot going on, and chaos often isn't good in photos. So it's our job as photographers to simplify the scene, to work it, to make it make sense for the viewer, and to create an emotional connection in that photo that the viewer will feel. In this particular scene, I shot this with my drone, and I was flying with a friend of mine who's an amazing photographer. And he's actually a pretty famous drone photographer. And so he had a shot where Mary was like, he'd lined her up with the Sears Tower, and he didn't want to get that same shot. And so I was looking for another composition, and the sun peeked up above the horizon, and I was like, that is it. And I lined it up with her hands. And so for me, I love this, and I really worked it. I was up and down and just trying to find a composition that I liked that was interesting, right? If you work it, you can really find things. I had some guys, I was out, my night photography, I was out in New Mexico in this really remote place, this formation known as the Alien Throne. And I came around the corner, and these two guys, like right before, kind of right at the end of the day, these two guys are set up on tripods. And I walked in, they're like, hey, don't go in there. And I'm like, oh, are you shooting? And they're like, no, but we're going to be. And I was like, it's okay, I'll be gone. And so I walked around and like checked out the area and kind of figured out compositions I wanted to have. And then I went away and shot some other things. And I came back, they're in the same spot. They shot for 3 hours in one position all night long, and they were not shooting a time lapse. They were just shooting individual images. They literally never moved. Don't be those guys. Even if it's the best composition ever, move around, try something different. Often our first thought isn't the best thought, or isn't the only thought, for sure. And I find when I like move around, it helps me hone in on what's the better composition. So really kind of work the scene. And I always think of those guys who literally stood there for 3 hours and took the same photo for 3 hours. Yeah, kind of painful. So one of the things, and I teach a class called Love Your Tripod. So I think about photography, composition, of course, and content. But when I think about how I'm going to set up my camera and how I want the image to feel, I think about shutter speed first. And the reason I think about shutter speed first is I think that it creates more of a creative handle for us than any of the other two settings you can choose. So I think about shutter speed. How do I want it to feel? Do I want to smooth things out? Do I want to create a feeling of motion? Do I want spiky? Do I want to freeze the action? What do I want this photo to feel like? What's the mood I want to set? And then I think, okay, how much depth of field do I need? What aperture am I going to select? And then ISO's, it's math, right? It's the outcome. And so this shot I was actually demonstrating. It's been snowing about 10 minutes before this. And I was out with my Love Your Tripod class. And that's about a 2-minute exposure. And I love how I have some movement in the sky, but it really simplifies the whole scene. And it becomes very much about the shapes and the colors, and not so much about what's going on in the sky. And I have a lot of symmetry with the reflection. And so it becomes very simple. And those clouds almost create a natural vignette that take us right into that photo. and the black and white kind of or monochromatic nature of all the rest of everything makes that red bridge kind of hop out at us. You know, that long exposure is how I got that feeling. Thinking about how long I wanted the shutter speed to be really changes how the photo feels. So here's kind of an example across kind of three different ideas, right? On the left, this for me was all about the shapes and the texture of that ice on the stones. And it was kind of a calm night. And I just really wanted to kind of simplify everything else in the photo. And so I went with a long exposure. It didn't need minutes to do it because it was pretty calm. And so I did this one at 30 seconds. And I was able to really smooth out the lake and takes texture out of the water so that the texture of the rocks becomes what the image is all about. The one in the middle, another one of those big wave days. I just love those. And in this case, the waves were making some really interesting patterns. And so I really wanted to freeze the action. And it's not obvious when you look at the photo, but it's a very cold day. And so you can kind of see the steam rising off the water as it hits the cold shore. And so depth of field kind of wouldn't help me because you can see the heat distortion on the lighthouse. And so I need enough depth of field to have my wave be in focus, but I don't need depth of field beyond that. And so I went with a really fast shutter speed, trying to really freeze the action, and shot a whole bunch of these. I like the weird shapes that water can make. Over here, this is early in the winter. So the lakefront does this. You get some freezing, and then it gets eroded by the waves. And you get these, I think they look like sand castles. And so I wanted to highlight the sand castles, and I wanted to capture them with the city skyline. So I waded out into the water as one does when it's 10 degrees out, and did some long exposures. I would have liked to have been a little bit further out to line this up a little bit better with the skyline, but my boots weren't any taller than this, so this is where I ended up. So I guess maybe bigger boots are the thing I need to do. But I chose a shutter speed because of a second, which is a little longer than I normally would do if I want to show texture in water. But I wanted to smooth it out without smoothing it out too much because I wanted this photo to be all about the texture of these strange shapes of the frozen sand. So you can think about how do I select a shutter speed? And if we're going to select shutter speeds that are in the realm of a second or 30 seconds, we need to be on a tripod because we're well outside the kind of shutter speeds we can be at and still be handheld. Even with some of the stabilization and some of the newer mirrorless cameras allows you to cheat the rule number one, the handheld rule of, you want your shutter speed to be equal to or faster than 1 over your focal length. So if I'm shooting at 24 millimeters, I'm sure you guys all know this, I want to be at 1 over 24 or faster. So we need a tripod to be able to do some of these longer exposures and create some of these effects. Obviously at a 250th, anyway, 1 over 2,500, I have a hard time saying that, apologize, is obviously in handheld territory, and I did shoot that one handheld. Another thing we can think about shutter speed is with people in city scenes where we're not in nature. This one is between 1 and 2 seconds. I think it's like 1.6 seconds is my memory. So I'm letting these people blur a little bit intentionally to create figures, not just ghosts, but figures. And then this bus trail actually simplifies the scene on the left side. If you think about um, reducing what's there. If this bus isn't here, I've got cars, I've got bridge house, I've got people. There's a lot of stuff happening over there. This simplifies that side of the scene and lets the whole photo draw us into the image. Over here, maybe I'm convincing you that winter's wonderful. Um, Over here, a snowstorm. Don't miss a snowstorm either. We get less and less of them, so they're becoming more and more special. But even when they were more frequent, they're fabulous. So snow is fun because it just transforms the world, right? And here I'm using a speed light to light the snow and an open aperture to make it be bokeh out of focus for me. And so, um, and of course, I want to be fast enough to freeze my pedestrian here in my taxi. And that snow, what we call snowgy here, or bokeh snow, is really a fun effect. And I always shoot that with my speed light on manual. I never do it through the lens, because depending on the light and the size of the snowflakes, you need more or less. You can overexpose these and have them be giant, overexposed white balls. You think about clouds, a really fast shutter speed for something like a shelf cloud rolling in. Really shows all that gnarly. We don't want to smooth that at all right? We want to see all of those little gnarly bits of that cloud, and that's what conveys the power of that. Over here, kind of on the exact opposite end, it's kind of a surreal scene with clouds streaming through the sky and even the ice moving in front of us. Just two really different feelings because of the shutter speed that I selected. Of course, we can't talk about shutter speed without talking about light trails. We can really use these as a foreground element in a shot like this, where I've got this warm light kind of pulling us into the city at dawn with the warm light on the city. It helps unify the foreground and the background of the image. And if you think about like this same shot with a fast shutter speed, would be kind of boring, and it would either have empty streets or maybe a couple of cars. I always want to think about how long does it take a car to traverse the scene, and then my shutter speed wants to kind of match that. If there's not a lot of traffic, if there's steady flow, the longer's better. It's easy, right? But if it's 1, 2 cars, maybe less frequent, you want to kind of try to match your shutter speed to how long the cars take to get through whatever your frame is. So tips for shutter speed. The first thing I think about is, what do I want it to look like? How long should the shutter speed be? What's the feeling I want to convey? And then aperture, that's all, how much depth of field do I need? And then ISO is whatever it needs to be to make the exposure be right. Use a tripod. Tripod's your friend. And we can use solid neutral density filters. Any of you landscape photographers probably use these along with your polarizing filters, right? To extend the shutter speed more than the conditions would let us without them, right? And so we have all this control over how long our shutter speed can be with those tools. Now we can convey different kinds of feelings depending on what we want to express in the image. And then finally, I wanted to touch on nighttime photography, because I think one of the things that is so nice in the city is how beautiful it is at night. It just sparkles, right? And so what are some tips for how to capture that? So the biggest thing is we have to protect our highlights, right? So as soon as we get through kind of the middle of blue hour and the sky starts to be darker than the lights, at that point we need to be underexposing the image So if you're shooting an aperture priority, you need to be using exposure compensation, and you need to be like -1 to -2, maybe even a little bit more, depending on the situation. And if you shoot in manual, then you would just want to underexpose it on your light meter by about the same amount, -1, -2, somewhere in there, so that you don't overexpose, because we want to capture all those colors, right? The city's so colorful at night, and it's sad if your blues go to white and we don't have that color that we captured. Think about like this water fountain. This is at Navy Pier, and I just think it's really fun, and kids love to play in this, and it's pretty active all night long. So you can do street photography here, you can do long exposures, there's all these different kinds of things you can do, but it's really colorful and beautiful at night. And light trails are always fun in the city. I really like Chicago has the 2 levels. Everybody's probably heard of Lower Wacker. Um, I think it was in the Blues Brothers. And we have this up-down city where we have another level that's kind of a little bit hidden. And I'm kind of interested in the places where those connect. And so I have a number of photos where that happens. And here's one. So you can see the 2 levels of the city kind of feeding into some of the iconic parts of the city here. Ferris wheel, fireworks. We have fireworks twice a week here in Chicago on Labor Day, Memorial Day to Labor Day. And my favorite time to shoot the Ferris wheel is in June, because in June is Pride Month. And so the whole city, not just the Ferris wheel, is in rainbows. It is absolutely beautiful. Like all the buildings get rainbow colors instead of like purple or red or whatever, they're in rainbows. And it's just so colorful and so nice. And so I usually try to go out of my way sometime in June to go to the Ferris wheel and capture some photos. So, and it's fun to do it on a night when we've got some fireworks to offset it as well. Again, here is a place, like the center of this Ferris wheel is the brightest part. And so if you don't blow out the center, you're not going to blow out your fireworks, and you're not going to blow out the rest of the Ferris wheel. So this is the place that you probably want to look. You always want to look at that brightest thing that matters and make sure that that's not blown out, and then the rest of your image will be okay. Because when we're doing long exposures, we can't do HDR, we can't bracket, because when we put them together, we get like all kinds of weird ghosting, right? So we have to get one frame that captures what we want. And that means it'll be dark, right? This is after astronomical twilight. This is full dark. But that's okay, because we've got a lot of light to define the scene. And then before the fireworks started, I just played around with my long lens, and I did some zoom bursts and some panning as the Ferris wheel turned. So I got all kinds of things going on here. But it can be fun to get these abstract colors and movement, and no 2 of them are alike. So it can be really fun to do some experimental stuff too while you're at it. So try to find ways to be creative and create something that's different, right? Fog again, just magic, and creates all this glow. This was a terribly cold night. It seems like a theme. It had been very cold, and we had a big warm up, which often means fog, right? Because everything's cold. And so we're like a cold glass of lemonade on a hot day. And so I was out here, and this scene was amazing. I was like, oh my God, I love this composition. There was not a soul around, not one person. It was wet, miserable. I mean, nobody wanted to be out except photographers, right? And these 3 people just like appeared out of nowhere, walked through the scene, never saw another person out there, out on Navy Pier the whole night. And they showed up right at the right time. I just felt so lucky. We can pan. I love panning. It's another way to convey movement. And these guys are one of my favorite subjects because they're so lit up. They're colorful. And so again, got to watch those highlights. But panning is a great technique to work on. And it's wonderful wildlife photographers. It's wonderful for things that are moving. Kids, dogs, all kinds of subjects are great for panning. And then at night, it's fun to do street photography, especially when the weather's bad. And things are lit up. You get a very kind of, I don't know, cinematic look and feel to images. And of course, now we need to have some pretty high shutter speeds. So we also end up with some pretty high ISO in these situations. But, you can create some beautiful images at night just by defining the places where there's light. So at night, protect your highlights. So I suggest to turn on your highlight alert, or if you're a Sony shooter, they call it zebra. A lot of people call it the blinkies. So when you play it back, anything that's overexposed will blink at you. You can look at your histogram, right? It'll show you if you're going to white, but it won't show you where you're going to white. So a lot of times in these scenes, you might have street lights that you don't care if you overexpose a little bit. But the colorful lights are the ones we want to make sure we're not overexposing. So I think it's really helpful to be able to see which things are getting overexposed when you're doing night photography in the city. Think about shutter speed. It's just so important. And when you need to use a tripod, and get creative, have fun with it. Nights in the city are just magic, right? They're just beautiful. Okay, so this is the end. Just wanted to talk to you a little bit about getting creative and kind of just walking you through a shot that I took. Think about trying new techniques and combining things you do from, I do a lot of different kinds of photography. And so I try to bring things I learn over here into here. Sometimes it can be really helpful to be creative that way, right? Try new things. Don't be afraid to fail. My dad thinks he's really funny, and he says, "Oh well, film's cheap these days," and we can always just delete it. We're not having to develop it and paid for the film or whatever. So we can take a lot of risks and take photos and do things that we can always learn from. I've learned a lot from some of my failures that turned out to be brilliant mistakes, right? And you can learn things. You're like, whoa, that's awesome. That's not what I was trying to do, but I want to do that again. So the story here is, this winter, the very first time it got cold. So we actually got some ice starting to form on the lakefront. And so what happens is, in this case, the sand got wet and it froze, and then maybe the waves got smaller. And so this stayed, and then it got kind of eaten out by the waves underneath it. And so you have this ice shelf of sand with these little icicle stalactites here happening. And so I went out and I took this, and these were fun to find. And I really had fun walking down the beach and seeing this ice as it formed. I took this one too. This is an iPhone shot. With the little form. So I just wanted you to kind of see what was in my head. So when I got home and I put these on my computer and I looked at them, I was like, oh, wow, there's a lot going on under here that I can't really see. It would have been really cool if I'd been there maybe around blue hour, so the lights in the city would be on, and then I could light underneath, and then it'd be bright and bright. It'd look weird lit underneath, I think, if it weren't darker. That was my thought. And so I thought, oh, I want to do that. I've got these little lights. And so the next day I went out. Of course, that ice wasn't there anymore. Those shelves were gone because it changes too fast. But I found this ice, and I did a time lapse for the sunset with kind of this scene, and it was really pretty, right? And then I said, okay, now it's getting dark enough. Let's try this lighting idea. And so I took my light and I made it blue. It's a full spectrum light, right? So I lit this ice up blue, probably a little overbaked, right? But just playing around and see what I could do. So that was okay, but it kind of wasn't what I was hoping for. I maybe like this better anyway. So then I went looking for some other ice, and there was this ice that, so this is a pier, and then the water washes over the pier, and then it makes icicles. And so the icicles are kind of three-dimensional, and they hang over like claws, kind of, you can see a little bit of what it looks like here. And so I set this up. It was kind of hard to get under there and get my camera, positioned under here and get everything because I'm in a maze of ice. And so this was the first one I took. And I loved all the crazy ice, but I didn't like the way it was framing the city. I wanted to see a little more of the skyline. And so this is the shot I took, and I lit it a couple times, and I was like, I don't like it. So I didn't work it. I didn't, focus stack, which I would have had to do to get this icicle in focus and, some of the stuff back here in this guy. But you can see why I liked the ice, but didn't like the composition, right? So then I move forward, and you see where I'm going to end up kind of right here beyond this first set of icicles. So I'm simplifying a little bit. And I move forward, and I set up this shot. So now I can see the skyline, and you've got, the ice creeping into the skyline. And I lit it blue again. And you can see I've got a little bit of this light from the sunset. And also there's some lights that way that light the beach that are sodium vapor, so they're yellow. So I have some like kind of nice yellow highlights, and then I lit the underside of it blue, and I kind of liked that. But I wanted a little bit better composition, so I moved again. This was kind of hard to get to. I was like had my camera literally against the ice and kind of jammed up in under there to get the composition I wanted. So now I've got this ice kind of encompassing the city skyline, right? And stacking it up. And I lit it this crazy blue, and just kind of had fun with it. And so, I took the lights that I use for night photography when I'm doing my Milky Way photography, or I also use them for like macro photography and flowers and stuff like that. And I took those out into my landscape or my cityscape and lit the ice to get something that, is really different. And it's probably a little too blue. We could fine tune this a little bit, but you can kind of see where I could go with this. It becomes like a ball rolling downhill, and then everything can be lit up, right? You start thinking about, but the lighting also allows you to see more of the textures of this ice, which is part of what makes it so interesting to me. Because this is a little bit dark down in this ice cave that I've kind of set up inside of. So just a couple of final thoughts. I'm sorry I've talked forever. First of all, this is stuff I see with people who come on my workshops and even in my classes. Know your equipment. It's hard to be creative, and it's hard to learn new techniques if you can't get your camera, you don't know where that button is, or it's doing something you don't understand why it's doing. So get really familiar with your equipment, especially if you're going on vacation, going somewhere special. I can't tell you how many people, like right before they go on vacation, like, okay, that's it, I'm going to pop for that new camera. Don't do that, right? Get that new camera 3 months ahead of time and play with it and be really familiar with it, because you're just going to struggle. You're not going to get, you can't focus on composition if you're fighting with your camera, right? It needs to be a tool that you're really familiar with. And then work the scene, just keep working it, keep trying something new. Like, okay, this is good. Can I do better? What else could I do? Could I get lower? Could I get higher? How can I change this? That kind of process, I think, will really yield benefits for you. And then the other thing I want to say, I do a lot of planning, right? You see moons and, this kind of stuff. And that's wonderful. But serendipity is really important too. And so I think balance, don't plan everything and don't wing it all the time. Do a little bit of both, because I think those work together really well. Get creative. Don't be afraid to play, try things, do new things. And hone your editing skills. It's part of the skill set, right? Really important. And set a challenge for yourself and keep learning. So thank you. I'm here's my contact information again. I've got some classes at Chicago photography classes. If you're around, some of those I teach online. Shoot for the Moon and Stars is 100% online, and some upcoming workshops. So I'm in October. I'm going up to the Porcupine Mountains in Michigan on the South Shore of Lake Superior. It's a beautiful place, for I think it's 4 or 5 days. And then the reason I rescheduled, Linda, is I'm going to Patagonia in December. So anybody who'd like to come along on that, we'd love to have you come. So I'm doing that with a friend of mine who's lived in Patagonia or in Chile, excuse me, for the last 30 years. And it's an amazing place. And boy, it's like tons of wildlife and incredible landscapes. So,
Yep. Okay, Gerri, I've got a couple of questions for you if you've got a minute here. Um,
okay.
so Hallie, okay, so you like cold weather. I will confess I'm not so good in the cold weather. But Hallie's question was, how do you dress for such cold weather? I mean, to me,
Mhm.
it was like crazy cold. Do you have special gloves? Let's start with that. Something that'll
So,
help you to touch your
yeah,
buttons.
I think gloves are the hardest part.
Mhm.
So I actually have a system now that has a liner glove and then a mitten over the top of it. And they were made for the Austrian military. Um, and it's a heat company. B&H carries them, so you can find them there if you want to check it out. They're stupidly expensive for a glove system, but if you're going to be out all the time, they're really good. And a friend of mine who lives in Saskatchewan, which makes this look warm, right, told me, Gerri, these work really well. So I was like, okay, I'm willing to try. And I think the key to those is the liner has a pocket for a hand warmer, and then the mitt that opens also has a pocket for a hand warmer. So when your hand is out and your fingers start getting cold, you close it up. You don't have to heat it with the heat of your hand. That hand warmer is keeping the interior of the mitt warm. So you have something warm to put your hands in. So those work really well. That was my hardest thing. They're still a little clunky to work with. It's hard to find the little buttons on your camera. So I end up using the screen and the menus that I don't normally. I just, but it can be hard to find things. Um, I wear a ton of clothes, right? I have my, when it's really cold, when we get these polar vortexes occasionally that will have like -20, -30 mercury. I'm not talking about wind chill. It's cold. Um, I'll have 3 layers on the bottom and windproof layer on the outside. Same thing on the top, like really warm, and a warm hat. And I have a hood on my coat. Hood's the key because cold air doesn't get down your neck. Then everything's sealed up. Goggles if it's really cold and blowing, and a face mask. So you can't see me. I'm like the invisible man in there.
When before we started recording, and I said, "Hey Gerri, I may show up in Chicago and let's go shoot." She's like,
Do
"Yeah,
it.
let's do it." And I'm thinking, okay, let me be very specific.
Not in winter.
I'm thinking June. I would do it once, I think, but just for the opportunities to get some of the shots that are just that atmospheric, just they just really add to the films. Just and
Weather's amazing, right?
yeah, you showed so many examples of that. Andy's question is, do you use a trigger to get your lightning shots, or do you have any tricks that might help him?
No, it's like running a time lapse, constant, right? So you set your exposure and then just one after another, and then you want to have your shutter open as much as possible so that your chances of catching it are the best. At night in a city, a trigger doesn't work very well because there are too many light sources, right? Things that are about as bright. So it's a little easier to get the exposure right actually in the city because we have all the bright lights.
Okay. Okay, I think I caught everybody's questions. But I'm going to share with you the chat because, you know, every other comment was creativity, creativity, and you have more than most people got. So I think you cut in line or got in line twice. I'm not sure. I have been to Chicago 4 times, I think, 3 times purposely taking my camera to take
Mhm.
shots of, cityscapes. And I have certainly made it to quite a few of the places that you showed tonight. And I feel like all my shots need to be redone completely. And I love that.
Well,
I love that. That's not a, envy. It's
mhm.
just okay, I can do better. And um, that's just kind of that spark I need to remind myself you can always do better. You can always be more creative. And you certainly accomplished that tonight, showing off your portfolio. Thank you very much for coming and doing this. And I won't put you on the spot, but I would love to have you come back. And I'm pretty sure I could get hands raised in this room to agree with me. But Gerri, thank you so much for giving us your Wednesday evening and coming and sharing and showing us what we can do if we step or step into a coat and try something different. Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be winter, but yeah, I it's just so pretty in the winter time. So
Oh, I love the winter photos. I just know that I would probably be a little whiny for anybody to be around. All right. Well, next week, portrait photographer Stephen Mack returns to inspire us with his presentation, Reimagining the Classics. He's using art history to inspire contemporary photography. Until next time, go out, create something beautiful, and I hope that we see you again soon.